In this video, I'm going to show you how to install cruise control on any K car. Let's go! So here's what we're going to be running through in this video. First of all, I'm going to talk about why almost all K cars do not have cruise control. Then I'm going to talk about universal kits that can be used on K cars, both cable operated and electronic universal cruise control kits. I'm then going to be talking about brands and where you can buy the kits, how the cable operated kits work, where are you going to install all the parts and where is it going to sit in the engine bay. And then I'll run through some setup and testing, and I'll leave you with some learnings when I go through this whole process for the first time myself. I'm going to put chapters in here, so if you're following along or doing this yourself, it should make it a little bit easier for you. It's getting more common to see small cars having cruise control, at least as an option if not standard. So why don't K cars have cruise control? Well, they're made for a very specific market, as you know. In Japan, a lot of the streets are really narrow. These cars are perfect for that. They're also pretty low speed limits, so they're not going to be going some of the speeds that we do in other countries, and really they're not designed for long distance cruising where cruise control is really handy to have. They're designed for city streets, stop start, traffic lights, that kind of thing. So I guess the demand just isn't there in that particular market, and it's not even an option for almost all K cars when they were sold new. I've even done some research on the latest Alto works, and I've never seen one with cruise control either. So it's not just because this is an older one, it's still not an option that many people look for. The only K cars I've seen that actually have cruise control is the Honda S660 and the Honda N1, but the RS, which is the kind of top of the line one. So if cruise control is essential for you, going down this DIY universal cruise control kit option is really the only way to do it. You can't retrofit parts because they were never available new. So how do these universal cruise control kits work? And which type do you need? Well, the first clue is going to be in the engine bay. Take a look at your throttle body. If it's got a cable like this running to it, which actuates the throttle, this is connected to your throttle pedal in the interior, and it moves the throttle butterfly by pulling on this cable. Well, then you've got a cable operated throttle. If you've got what looks like a big black box on the side here and looks more like a servo, that is an electronic throttle. Most cars in the last 10 to 20 years will have electronic throttles, and ones that are older like this one here, which this is 31 years old, has got a throttle. Things like Mark 1 and Mark 2 MX-5s, EG and EF Civics, things like that will all have cable operated throttles. The Honda Beat that I had before this car, same thing. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to focus on cable operated throttles like this one. Basically how they work is they attach a second cable to this throttle body so that both the pedal can operate it and also the cruise control unit can pull that for you. I'll run through the full kit in a minute, but just for the purpose of showing you the throttle cable that comes on these universal kits, there is a servo inside here that will turn and actuate this to either push this cable out or pull it in. And this will be attached to that same butterfly wheel. Let's talk brands that sell these universal kits. When I went looking around, this particular brand called Rostra kept coming up again and again and again. They were based in the US and a lot of people were selling them under different brands in Europe, but it was definitely the Rostra manufactured product. So I kept digging around and finding, are there any other options out there, or is this the only player in the market? I did find another mention of a brand, I think in the Netherlands, called John Gold. I'm not sure what's going on there, but almost all the products seem to be out of stock. Maybe the business is winding down. I'm not actually sure what's happening there, but it didn't give me a whole lot of faith. Whereas Rostra seemed to have built up a pretty good relationship over the years. They've been going in the States for 30, 40, 50 years or something like that. All the materials that come with it actually look like they were made a long time ago, but it still applies. So I went for a Rostra kit. So here's what's included in the kit. I talked about this servo and cable already. That's really the core of the kit. There is then a mounting bracket for this to mount that in the engine bay. There's also a bracket for mounting the cable, and lots of connectors and cable ties and things like that. Here are all the items shown here in this manual that comes with it. As I mentioned before as well, the stalk does not come with it, so you have to choose the stalk that you are looking for. Next up was sourcing one. As I said, there's a lot of European companies that are either rebranding it or reselling it here in Europe, but it seemed to be like double or triple the price that it was to buy it from the States. I did find the kit that I was looking for on Amazon.co.uk, but for some reason they didn't want to ship to Ireland. The product was actually coming from America. I could have used one of those UK postal addresses where it's forwarded on, but you know, it's not an ideal scenario. So I actually went on to Amazon.com, the American site, and bought it directly from there. They were fine with shipping it directly to Ireland, and they charge all the taxes and VAT and everything there on the US side, so you don't get any surprises when it lands in the country. So that was my best price I could find anywhere. So Amazon.com is definitely my recommendation for sourcing this kit. If you want to know the exact model numbers of the products that I'm going to use here today, the universal kit is called the Rostra 250123. And then basically it doesn't come with a stalk or buttons that you can put in the dash or anything like that. There's a few different options. So you have to choose one that's correct for you. You can get stalks to go on the left or the right hand side of the steering wheel, for example. And this one that I got was a left hand mount. And the model number for this particular one was 2503742. Hope that helps. I put the Amazon links in the description for the Rostra products. Again, they were the cheapest I could find, so go for it. They're affiliate links, so I might earn a tiny little bit out of each one, but it won't cost you any more. Other than connecting it up to your throttle cable here and adding the servo, you will also need to connect to some wiring in behind the dashboard, things like the tach, clutch pedal, and things like that. It'll depend on your car which you need to connect to, whether it's manual or automatic. All of that is explained in the documentation that comes with it. So as you know, K-car engine bays typically are pretty crammed, and this one is no exception. So one of the biggest challenges you're probably going to have is, where am I going to fit this in there? You can get creative with where to mount that servo if there is no space in your engine bay. They do recommend not to put it in the cabin because that servo can make quite a lot of noise as it's actuating. I suppose if you have a loud car you mightn't hear it, but it'll depend on your situation. If you had something like maybe a Honda Acti or a pickup truck or something like that, if you can't fit it in the bay, that is the best place, because obviously the length of the cable needs to be longer. But something like an Acti where the engine bay is actually behind the cabin, you know, there might be a lot more room for playing with that under the bed, for example. In one of my last videos, you'll see that I was pretty happy with sourcing a drop-in HKS air filter for the standard air box so that it could retain the stock cold air intake and everything there. The problem with this air box is it's pretty large. It looks compact on the top, but it actually goes down below that quite a bit. And it's just not going to give me room to install that. I did try it out. I'm not crazy about pod filters, to be honest. Yes, they do add a bit of extra noise, but they also get heated up by the engine bay. But I think it is the best compromise for what I'm doing here. I'm not going to be track driving this car. It's a road car. So put the pod filter here, get back some real estate that I actually installed that servo down below it. So that is the plan. I'm pretty sure I have to leave this breather pipe on and it connects to the new filter. Not quite sure if this is retained or replaced, but I'll leave it there for the moment. As you can see here, there is quite a lot of room to play with, so hopefully I can get the pod filter to sit roughly here and put the servo below it. The belts are there, but again, I don't think it will be that close to it. Just doing a quick mock-up here before I get mounting any brackets or anything like that. This is the new pod filter, the super airflow filter from HKS. Just have that protective bag on it there just to keep it clean for the moment. And I have just placed the cruise control actuator down here loosely. It basically, as long as it doesn't go past the frame rail that runs along there, it won't interfere with the belts at all down there. So I could either orientate it pointing straight up, or I can angle it down kind of more towards the back of the headlight bucket, which might be better for the cable. But either way, it just needs to have clearance away from the engine itself, because obviously that will rock back and forth and you don't want it rubbing against that, and stay away from the belts and then have enough room for the air filter. It's going to be tight, but I think I'm going to be able to do it. I've now attached a bracket to the back of the actuator and kind of mocked it up there loosely, and then added the air filter on properly there, just to see, is it definitely going to fit. You see the black bracket here. What I did was go into one of the existing bolt holes here. Now ideally you would put 2 bolts in there, so I think what I'll do is I'll put in a riv nut. This is a much better solution than bolting into below that, because essentially there is no arch liners on this car, so it would just bolt straight through into the wheel well and obviously get rusty and all that kind of messing. So this is kind of going into just behind the outer wing there, and will be weather protected and also using one of the existing bolt holes. So I am definitely happy with that solution. One issue I foresee here is that the length of this throttle cable is just far too long. In your average engine bay, you know, you'd be able to route it, or you would need that length, but I'm only going from here to here, so I'm gonna have to either cut this, or I'm gonna have to find a way to route it around so that the angles aren't too big, and maybe loop it in a circle somewhere. I don't know, I'll have to figure that out. I just removed the air filter to show you a little bit more clearly where this bracket runs. It will still allow me to get access to the changing the headlight bulbs and stuff like that. So it uses this existing hole. So I'll either go in above or below it there and stick a riv nut in, so I get a bit more of a stronger attachment. So I can show you. Not sure what this was used for before, but this little indentation fits this bracket absolutely perfectly. I'm just about to insert this riv nut, but before I do, one of my pet peeves is people drilling holes for these riv nuts and then just leaving the bare metal there, which is going to rust away nicely after you insert this and you won't be able to see it. So give it a little lick of paint, let it dry, then continue with the install. Okay, the bracket is now permanently mounted. It's pretty secure. I did put a couple of bits of foam in anywhere it was touching the body, so it doesn't rattle. Hi, this is Future Dave, and here's a perfect example of when following the instructions step by step doesn't always work out. You should read all the instructions before you start, but I didn't do that. So I've got a situation where I've now prepared the throttle cable from the cruise control, and I've got to the point in instructions where it says that this needs to be threaded on the outer sleeve, and then a bracket, and well, this is added onto the threads to kind of hold the cable in place, and then this bracket is used to keep the cable steady. Kind of like on the stock one, what this does, this bracket here holds this throttle cable in place. You're kind of recreating that for the cruise control. But I had already taken these steps to add all this on, and this is the nut you're meant to use to create the threads on here, and I can't get the nut on. I also had all this connected to the throttle body already, had to take it all off. And the bracket also will need to go through that snap-in connector, and then it'll need to go through the bracket. So all of this needs to be in place really. So you can lay everything out, but you don't need to connect it up to the throttle body permanently until you've got these brackets in place and you've done all of the prep work on the throttle cable here. Okay, time to thread this outer sleeve. So you use this 11mm nut that comes with it and basically run it down the outer sleeve. Just stop there for a second so you can see what it's doing. And here is what you are left with. You'll then put in this snap-in bracket and thread it on to the end of this. And it says that there has to at least be some threads past the end of this, but where you adjust this will be determined by where the bracket goes. The Rostra kit comes with 5 different types of connectors for depending on how your throttle works. But for K cars, almost all of them are going to be a cable operated throttle that will work in the same way as this does. On the throttle body itself here, the cable terminates in a kind of a T. So basically you disconnect that and take that out, and then you connect it to this. So this has a little loop on the end, and then it has a connector here. So this is the cruise control cable, the new cruise control cable, and this slots in here like this and marries them together. You then crimp this down and put the cover over the top of it. And then this loop here basically gets sandwiched into where this T is. So both of them are pulling from this same point. I'll set it all up now and show you what I mean. I've now joined these 2 cables with the connector and put the cover over the top. So these can't come loose now. This is the T that I was referring to at the end of the stock throttle cable. And what we're going to be doing basically is getting the cruise control cable and this loop on the end and looping it around like that, putting it back into the throttle wheel here, and it gets sandwiched in the middle there so it can't come loose. And here is the new bracket, which is basically runs along the same profile as the existing bracket that holds the standard throttle body cable. And here's the new cruise control cable. It's all connected up. These 2 are kind of zip tied together so they don't hang loose and get caught up on each other. And the actuators down here, throttle cable runs up kind of under this little eyelet that's used for lifting the engine out, over and around. It seems a bit convoluted, but it doesn't interfere with anything. And I've got a cable tied in a couple of positions, and obviously it's anchored here. So not too messy. Next up is going to be probably the more challenging part for me, wiring. If you want to get yourself a cool t-shirt like this, why not look at my shop? That's jazdashop.com. Check it out. The first step of the wiring is to unravel this harness. It has got these joiners here. There's 4 wires go to each. And basically what you do is disconnect them here, and all of this side of the harness will live in the engine bay, will live in the cabin, and from here back to the sensor will live in the engine bay. So you basically have to pass these through. The only connectors on the engine bay side are this one here, which we're not going to be using. That is to connect to a vehicle speed sensor, but there's a cable in the cabin that we're going to be tapping into for that, and a ground wire. So not much on this side, it's all in the cabin. I've now pushed the wires through this main kind of bulkhead grommet here, and the only items left to do on this side in the engine bay is number one, hook up that ground line, and then secondly to clean up all the cables, and I guess it protects from heat a little bit to tidy up all that. So cut this to size and fit. And the ground is now run to just here, and all of that shielding is on to where it goes through that grommet. So it's a lot cleaner now, you wouldn't really notice the extra wires. And this is where those wires come through to. I can now reconnect it back up to the rest of the loom and get going with the rest of the connections here. I just took out the seat because, you know, you inevitably end up doing some sort of weird yoga that stretches your back in ways it shouldn't be stretched, so get a bit more room. So I have hooked up all the wiring now. Basically there are two wires that go to the brake switch, which the connector is just up at the back of the brake pedal. There is the VSS, which is the vehicle speed sensor, which I was able to look at the wiring diagram for this car and see that there was one wire that goes from the ECU up to the speedo here, and that's basically used for the Japanese kind of speed limiter that's there as standard, so it needs to know what speed the vehicle is doing so it can cut the fuel. So that's the vehicle speed sensor. I didn't have to go all the way to the back of the tacho. I was able to trace that wire just based on the wiring diagram, based on what color it was, and find it there in one of the connectors. The next one here is a switched live. So I just took that from the back of the cigarette lighter socket. It has an inline fuse as well, so it shouldn't be a problem. And the last one, I was hoping to connect it here inside the cabin as well. But unfortunately I couldn't figure out exactly where to do it. This one is the tacho, and again I was hoping to get that somewhere at the back of the cluster here, but I couldn't figure out what from the wiring diagram what colour I was supposed to be connecting to. So the other way you can do that is in the engine bay for the tacho, and basically you connect it to the negative side of the ignition coil, and I just ran that into the cabin then to the rest of the loom. What the tacho is needed for is if you're in neutral, for example, it won't know what gear you've selected in a manual car, and it may just try and increase the throttle to try and get you up to the desired speed. And if it doesn't know that it's over revving, you know, it could obviously damage your engine or redline. You actually do need this feature in an automatic car as well, because it has to know when you're in neutral. And the way it does that is based on the tacho, or the tack. I keep saying tacho. So I haven't tried all this yet. Hopefully it goes according to plan. I have one last thing to do, which is to install the lever on the side of the steering wheel. So next up, you remove your steering column shroud and drill a hole so that you can pass this 9.5mm stalk through and all the cables. I've put mine specifically on the left side because it's a right-hand drive car. It'll allow me to get into the car easier and not knock off the stalk, because if it was here I might possibly hit it with my knees. I'm just test fitting this shroud back in to see the position of the stalk. Something to note here is there's a little kind of a wedge that they give you, which allows you to put it at an angle from the shroud. So to point it either towards you or away from you, just so it doesn't interfere too much with the other stalks, but also is convenient to use. So unlike the other stalks like that actually move up and down, this one just has buttons at the top, bottom, and to turn on and off on the end. I actually repositioned the stalk just so it sits, rather than behind the wiper stalk, it sits below it so that I can see the light, which is kind of important when you need to know if it's on or off or whatever. Next up is to basically take the wiring from that stalk and put the relevant connectors on them. Once you've hooked up all of your wiring, there is a very handy diagnostics mode that can be engaged before you go out and take your first test drive. This allows you to check if all the buttons on the stalk are registering with the cruise control unit. And it also allows you to check if the wires that you've connected to are correct, including the tacho, which you can check when the engine is running. You can also check the speed sensor, which is one that I found very handy. You can roll the car back and forward if you don't want to take it out on the road, because you need to be able to observe the LED on the unit itself. And that's how I discovered I connected to the wrong cable, and I used wiring diagrams to trace it back and look for other possible cables to connect to. I had a look at the wiring diagram and basically looked at all the colors of the cables that went into the ECU and all the colors of the cables went into the cluster, and looked for a common match between those, and I reduced it down to 5 options. So it was just a matter of going through and trying them. Luckily for me, it was the second one that I tried was the right one for the vehicle speed sensor. The other items that you can test in the diagnostic mode is the brake pedal. And if you have, some cars will require an extra sensor to be added for the clutch. I didn't need it on this one, and you can test that in the diagnostic mode as well. Wiring is tidied up, dash is back in, seats are in. There's only one thing left. Time to take it on test drive. Okay, I am now on the motorway. Just going a bit slow at the moment, so I can do this easily. My cruise control is down here. Click the on button and the little light comes on. Click set on the top, and then when I let off, let's see what happens. Feet are off the pedals. Now, I would say this is not ideal. It's kind of going in pulses. I don't know if you can see that. The revs. So it is doing its thing, but just not maintaining a steady level of acceleration. So if I click accelerate down here, it does accelerate up to a higher speed. Let's see how it handles this. Yeah, it's kind of pulsing. It's like pulling the accelerator cable and then letting off, pulling again every couple of seconds, which leads to a kind of a jerky kind of a ride. So I guess some more research is required. Okay, I'm home after the first test drive, and I've been doing a bit of research and looking through the documentation as well. There is some dip switches on the, if it'll focus, come on the Rostra unit itself, and they dictate various different settings which are laid out here. I have mine currently set to a 4-cylinder low. Now this is a 3-cylinder engine, but there is no option for 3 cylinders here. And I've got the gain set to mid, which is the way it comes as default and what it recommends to start with. So I've been doing some reading online. I found other people, particularly with light vehicles like motorbikes or very light cars, have tried other settings, like for example 8-cylinder low is one thing I'm going to try next, and if that doesn't work, I will start messing about with the gain here, the sensitivity, and maybe put it to extra low. The only thing you need to be able to change the settings here is turn the ignition off, and then just put a tiny little screwdriver in, flip one of the dip switches there and turn it back on, and it's good to go in the new settings. So I will let you know how that goes. Okay, I have changed the dip switches, so it's now on 8-cylinder low. So I guess it's no longer a 3-cylinder turbo, it's a V8, right? Well, I don't know if you can hear that, but I'm having the same issue. It is surging and going uphill. So I don't think it's any better at all. The sensitivity is currently set to mid, so I'm going to change this to extra low and see if it makes a difference. Okay, here we go again. Gain has been changed to a lower setting. Cruise control on. Set. Let go. Okay. This is a lot smoother. I'm going to accelerate up to 100, see what it's like at a higher speed. Yes! Success! I've nailed the settings. Woo! So there you have it. Hopefully this video will help anyone that wants to install cruise control on a K car that has a cable operated throttle. The main issues I ran into were, number one, finding the wire to connect it for the tachometer, which I ended up doing to the ignition coil. Number two, the vehicle speed sensor. It was just a matter of figuring out which cable to attach that to. Everything else was pretty much straightforward. I did have a couple of bits of playing once I got the cruise control working with the dip switches and finding the right combination that worked for me. The only change I made from the kind of default settings that were recommended in the manual were to put the extra low gain onto the settings. I am really happy with how it turned out. The price of the parts wasn't that expensive. Yes, there was a lot of fiddling and playing about. You know, it's not a quick job to do. You're going to do in a couple of hours. But I kind of really enjoyed the process, finding out where I was going to mount stuff, making all the brackets, hooking up all the wiring inside the dash, and then cleaning it all up. Big success. This obviously is not just a kit for K cars. People put these on all sorts of cars. Old muscle cars, things like that, cars that never had cruise control, or even cars that did have factory options, but they're just the parts too expensive. People have even put this on motorbikes. A Rostra don't recommend that, funny enough, but I found a lot of people online talking about how they install this exact kit on motorbikes. Another category of cars that people seem to install these kits on is camper vans. I guess a lot of camper vans don't have cruise control. That's where those dash mounted buttons come in handy rather than a stalk, because there's lots of real estate in camper vans, and sometimes that's the easiest to install option. Anyway, all the best. Slán.